Chapter 23, The Beast in the Shadows, Part 2. The air in the chamber thickened with an unnatural stillness as Dira hesitated at the entrance, her breath quick and shallow. She glanced nervously from one face to the next, a look of quiet terror flickering in her eyes. The group stood at the threshold, uneasy, with the scent of rot and decay wafting through the chamber, mingling with the growing sense of imminent danger. "What's wrong?" Thomas asked, his deep voice low and calm, but his eyes scanning the room with suspicion. He moved his large frame slightly to the side, trying to get a better view of the chamber, his hand resting casually on the hilt of a short sword. "Almost there," Dira muttered, but her words carried little conviction. She turned her eyes to the shadowed corners of the room, where the flickering lantern light barely reached, creating long, threatening shadows that seemed to stretch into the darkness. Her gaze flickered nervously between the group, never meeting their eyes for long. The atmosphere in the chamber was stifling, as if something ancient and hungry was stirring beneath the surface of the stone floor. The walls were slick with moisture, the smell of death thickened the air. And then, just as the group stepped further into the room, Wallace's instincts kicked in. He paused, his hand instinctively reaching for one of the short swords hidden beneath his cloak. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his sharp eyes scanning the chamber, noting the absence of the symbols that should have marked this place as a hub for the Sent Ones. He took a step closer to Dira, his gaze hardening. "You've led us into a trap." The realization hit like a cold wave, and the tension in the air escalated. Dira flinched at his words, but her face betrayed nothing. Her lips trembled, and her eyes darted around the chamber, panic starting to surface. "Answer him," Lucas commanded, his voice calm but firm as he stepped forward. His ability to read minds had given him insight into Dira's emotions, but now he needed more than just surface thoughts. He needed to understand what she truly feared. Lucas focused, his eyes narrowing in concentration. He felt the thoughts of the frightened cultist ripple through the air, a jumble of fear and confusion. She had no desire to fight, no intention of betraying them willingly, only a deep, desperate need to escape. "Stay where you are," Lucas said softly, his voice carrying an unnatural calm that made Dira freeze. He felt her pulse quicken in response, her muscles tensing as if she were about to bolt. Dira's hands clenched into fists, but she didn't move. Her body trembled, caught between fear and a futile desire to flee. Mina stepped forward, her expression a mix of determination and caution. Her heightened speed allowed her to move with such swiftness that Dira didn't have time to react. Before the cultist could even think to run, Mina had her tightly gripped by the wrist, pulling her body to a standstill. Dira gasped and struggled to break free, but it was futile. Mina held her with a vice-like grip, her body glowing with raw energy as the magic coursed through her veins. Her speed, while untrained in a magical sense, gave her the advantage, and her enhanced physical strength ensured that Dira couldn't escape. "Calm down," Mina urged, her voice cool and firm. Despite the chaos unfolding around them, she kept a steady hand on Dira, ensuring she wouldn't be used as a shield or put directly in harm's way. "I'm not letting you go." But as Mina spoke, a low, rumbling growl suddenly echoed from the darkness behind them, sending a shiver down the spines of everyone in the room. The air grew heavier, and the shadows seemed to stretch as something large moved in the distance. Wallace's grip on his short swords tightened. "Get ready," he muttered, his voice low and commanding. He didn't need to be told twice. From the shadows emerged a grotesque creature, its massive, sinewy form slithering into view. The lantern light flickered against its scales, revealing patches of thick fur and gleaming, razor-sharp claws. The beast's eyes glowed with a predatory hunger, its massive jaws opening to reveal teeth too large for its mouth. A low, bone-chilling growl escaped its throat as it lunged forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Wallace reacted instinctively, his blades flashing as he slashed at the creature's limbs, trying to buy time. The beast shrieked in fury, its claws swiping through the air, narrowly missing the group. Its movements were quick and unpredictable, and despite Wallace's expertise with weapons, he was forced to fall back. "Stay moving," he shouted, his eyes focused on the creature's every twitch. "Don't let it pin you." Lucas acted quickly, his telekinetic powers reaching out to form barriers between the group and the beast, slowing its movements. But the creature was relentless. It swiped at the air, sending shockwaves through the chamber that rattled the walls and made the water in the pools slosh violently. Lucas's defenses were wearing thin, and the creature's sheer strength was proving harder to halt. Mina, still gripping Dira tightly, moved with an uncanny fluidity, dodging the creature's attacks with grace and agility. Her body responded as if the magic within her had a mind of its own, her legs propelling her forward with explosive speed. Yet she never once loosened her hold on Dira, keeping her close even as the creature's claws scraped against her defenses. "Focus on the beast," Wallace barked, his short swords clashing with the creature's claws as it lunged toward him. Mina gave a quick nod, her eyes locking with Lucas's. She could feel the tension in the air, the need for a coordinated attack, but she couldn't release Dira, not with the danger this close. The creature roared, the sound deafening, and in that moment, all the group could do was fight with everything they had. Against the beast, against Dira's betrayal, and against the uncertain future that awaited them in the dark, foreboding depths. The battle with the sewer beast was relentless. Its grotesque form lurched from the shadows, its eyes glowing with primal fury as it attacked. Lucas and Wallace fought side by side, each trying to protect the group from the savage onslaught. The creature was massive, its sharp claws slashing through the air like blades. The stench of its breath was foul, a mix of decay and hunger. Wallace's weapon clanged against its thick hide, while Lucas strained with his telekinesis, throwing up barriers to slow its movements. Despite their combined efforts, the beast was an unyielding force, driven only by instinct and territorial rage. Mina's role was far less glamorous. Forced to hold Dira in place, she was immobilized in a way that felt like both a burden and a test. Dira, a woman shaking with fear, was far more of a distraction than any of the dangers surrounding them. Her panicked screams echoed through the sewer, heightening the sense of helplessness that the group was beginning to feel. She trembled uncontrollably, her body going limp in terror, until she lost all composure, urinating herself in a final desperate cry for mercy. The creature's attacks were relentless. Each strike sent vibrations through the stone, threatening to destabilize everything in its path. It didn't care for intelligence or tactics. It simply wanted to drive them away, to reclaim its territory. But just as they seemed overwhelmed, Thomas, following Wallace's earlier advice, made his move. His great strength and the sharpness of his instincts allowed him to leap into the fray, landing a powerful blow to the creature's flank that caused it to stagger back, momentarily off balance. Lucas, using his telekinesis, created a wall of force to slow the beast's movements, but even as it struggled to advance, the ground trembled beneath them. Wallace, determined to protect the group, sacrificed himself by charging toward the creature, trying to draw its attention. His gamble paid off, and for a moment the beast's focus was solely on him. But the creature retaliated, sinking its teeth into Wallace's leg, a venomous bite that sent a sharp pain radiating through him. He gritted his teeth, managing to ignore the worst of the sting as he fought on. The battle continued to swing back and forth. It wasn't until the creature began to show signs of exhaustion, its attacks slowing and becoming more erratic, that Wallace saw an opening. He took a breath, ignoring the weakness creeping into his body, and struck with all his remaining strength, landing a blow to the beast's side that sent it reeling backward with a roar of agony. The creature, realizing it was losing the fight, turned and fled, disappearing into the deep shadows of the sewer. Its retreat was as sudden as its attack, leaving only the sound of rushing water in the quiet aftermath. For a long moment, there was nothing but the heavy silence of the sewers, the faint scent of blood lingering in the damp air. The group stood still, catching their breath, their adrenaline-fueled rush starting to fade. Wallace winced, the venom now starting to take its toll, but he refused to show it. His breathing was shallow, but he remained alert, never letting his guard down. The group decided to retreat from the creature's territory, moving away to a safer location where they could rest and tend to Wallace's wounds. Dira was tied securely to prevent her from escaping, her trembling form a stark reminder of the terror the group had just faced. Wallace's wounds were grave, and with no antivenom, The group did their best to stop the venom spread by applying pressure and bandaging the bite. His breathing became more labored with each passing minute, but he stayed calm, his years of experience allowing him to manage the pain. As they rested, Wallace's gaze swept over the group. His voice was hoarse, but he offered a subtle compliment. "You all handled yourselves well. It's clear you've had some experience with wild beasts." His words, though simple, held a weight of respect. The group exchanged tired glances, their bond strengthened in the heat of battle. Wallace's acknowledgement, though brief, was a quiet recognition of their abilities and growth. Dira, however, remained the focus of their attention. Her body shook with continued tremors, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. The group could sense her discomfort, and the earlier outburst about fleeing still lingered in the air. What was she hiding? What did she know about the dangers they were about to face? Wallace, never one to let uncertainty linger, approached Dira after some time. His short sword was pressed firmly into her back. "Guide us back," he ordered gruffly, his voice thick with command, "and don't try to run." Dira trembled under the pressure of his threat, her fear of Wallace now outweighing her fear of the sewer beasts. She had no choice but to reluctantly agree to lead them out of the dangerous section of the sewer. Despite their exhaustion, the group knew they couldn't stay in one place for too long. With Wallace's injuries treated as best as possible, they gathered themselves and prepared to move deeper into the sewers. Dira led the way, her reluctance palpable, and the tension between her and the group was undeniable. Every step forward was filled with suspicion and unease. What lay ahead in the darkness, and what else was Dira hiding? The air in the sewers felt colder as they retraced their steps, Dira leading the way with her head bowed low. The stench of decay and damp stone still clung to the walls, but there was something else now, the weight of impending confrontation. Wallace, his injury still aching but manageable, kept a watchful eye on their guide, his hand never far from his weapon. Mina walked just behind, her gaze flickering between Dira and the dark path ahead, her body poised and ready for anything. Lucas brought up the rear, his mind already working in overdrive, the events of the past hours swirling around him. They soon arrived at the entrance to the hidden tunnel, the one they had used to slip away from the Sent One's temple. Dira, despite her trembling, managed to lead them unerringly to the spot. The familiar markings on the stone were there, cryptic symbols and scratched lines that had once seemed meaningless, but now, as they stood in the shadowed alcove, they felt like a map to something far greater. The group halted. Dira, still bound tightly, shifted uneasily under their collective gaze. The time for silence was over. "Here we are," Dira murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper. She glanced nervously at the dark tunnel, but the tension in the air made her hesitate. Wallace stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "We've had enough of your lies, Dira. You led us into that beast's lair, and now you'll tell us the truth." The rest of the group formed a loose semicircle around her, closing in, making it clear there was nowhere for her to run. Dira flinched at the surrounding attention but didn't speak. Her eyes flickered nervously to the shadows, but she said nothing. "Talk," Wallace pressed, his tone demanding, though his face remained impassive. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Mina took a step closer to Dira, but it was Lucas who spoke next. His voice quiet, but filled with the force of his will. "I can see it in you," Lucas said, his focus narrowing on Dira's trembling form. "You've been hiding something. We deserve to know who you're really working for." Lucas reached out with his telekinetic abilities, the air around Dira thickening as he began to probe deeper. Her mind, a jumble of fear and guilt, opened to him reluctantly, but Lucas pressed further. The waves of panic and doubt clung to her thoughts like a fog, but beneath that, there were memories, clear, precise fragments of her past that broke through her mental defenses. A vivid memory flickered before him, a dark, shadowed room. A hulking dwarf, dressed in ceremonial black robes, loomed in front of Dira. His voice was low and commanding, but the words sent a chill through Lucas's mind. "Spy on the Sent Ones. Follow them. Watch their every move. Report back to me. The Unbound must know what they're planning. You know what to do. We can't risk them getting too close." The memory struck Lucas like a blow to the chest. He felt the weight of Dira's betrayal deep in his gut, the cruel manipulation of her fears and doubts by the leader of the Unbound. It all made sense now. Dira had never been part of the Sent One's cause. She had been planted among them, a spy, reporting on everything they did. Lucas released his hold on her mind with a grim exhale, his eyes flicking up to meet the others. She's been spying on us. For the Unbound. Mina's eyes narrowed, her face a mix of anger and disappointment. So the Unbound knew everything we were doing. Dira was never on our side. Dira's face turned ashen, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She looked like she wanted to shrink into the earth itself. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words failed her. Lucas could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't ready to face what was coming. Wallace gripped his sword tighter. You're a traitor, and you'll face judgment for your actions. Take her to the Sent One's HQ, Lucas said, his voice cool and controlled. Let them decide what happens next. The decision was made. With Dira bound and the weight of their revelation hanging over her, the party moved quickly, following the signs that led through the labyrinthine sewer tunnels. They had barely noticed the markings before, random scribbles, hastily painted graffiti blending with the walls. But now, under the looming threat of betrayal, they seemed to pulse with significance. If you didn't know what to look for, the signs could have meant anything. But for those who understood, they were clear. A trail to the heart of the Sent One's power. At last, they arrived at the hidden passage that led to the Sent One's headquarters. The passage was narrow, the air musty, but the flickering light from the lamps in the distance was a sign of what lay ahead. It was a winding descent, narrow steps that took them deeper beneath the city, but they moved with purpose. The farther they went, the more the oppressive weight of the unknown pressed in around them. They emerged into the basement of the headquarters, a vast space that was both imposing and strangely serene. The scent of incense mixed with the cold, earthy smell of stone. The cultists within the hidden space were silent, their faces shrouded in hoods as they went about their work, performing quiet rituals. A few of the cultists looked up as the group entered, immediately recognizing the party. They exchanged knowing glances and immediately moved to intercept them. What is this? What's going on with Dira? One of the cultists asked. His tone was steady, but there was a flicker of curiosity and concern in his eyes. We bring her to be judged, Wallace said, his voice firm but clipped. She's been spying on the Sent Ones for the Unbound. The cultists nodded gravely, moving quickly to usher the group toward a higher level of the building. The air in the hallway became thicker, more sacred, the soft sounds of chanting growing louder as they ascended. At the top of the stairs, the party emerged into a large, ornate chamber. The walls were lined with heavy tapestries and intricate symbols, each one filled with an energy Lucas could feel crawling beneath his skin. The entire room seemed to hum with quiet power. In the center stood the leader of the Sent Ones, a stout, broad-shouldered dwarf named Galdor Ironfist. His long white beard flowed down to his chest, and his eyes gleamed with wisdom and authority. He was dressed in the ceremonial armor of the Sent Ones, and as his gaze fell upon Lucas and Mina, he gave a nod of recognition. You've arrived, Galdor said, his voice deep and measured. His eyes flicked to Dira, still trembling in her restraints. And I see you've brought a traitor with you. He stepped forward, his gaze shifting between Lucas and Mina. You are the ones I've been waiting for, he said, his tone almost reverent. The Sent Ones have foretold your coming. Outside, the view of the city stretched before them, surrounded by towering mountains and peaks, the city of Kingston appearing as a single island surrounded by wilderness. No other cities were visible, and the isolation of the Sent One's headquarters felt complete. We have much to discuss, Galdor continued, his eyes lingering on Lucas and Mina. And your role in the future of this world is more critical than you realize.